unlimited drama series.
After covering the rent with my emergency fund because my wife forgot to pay it again, I came home with a gas station dinner and a headache. She looked at the meal and said, "Wow, you really know how to make poverty taste worse." Then she threw it in the trash and said, "Try again tomorrow, idiot." That was the night I realized I wasn't a husband, just a wallet with a pulse. The foil crinkled as Vanessa tossed my gas station burritos into the kitchen trash like they were contaminated waste. The sound echoed in our upscale apartment, the apartment I'd been paying for entirely while she managed our finances. Bailey, our rescue dog, whimpered from his corner, sensing the tension that had become our normal evening routine. "Seriously, Alex?" Vanessa's voice dripped with disgust as she examined her manicured nails. "Gas station food? Again? What am I supposed to tell people when they ask what my husband feeds me?" I stood there, still in my work clothes, watching my dinner disappear into the garbage. The irony wasn't lost on me. I made more money than most people in this city. Yet I was eating like a college student, while my wife spent more on a single spa day than I'd spent on food all month. "Maybe tell them your husband works 60 hours a week to keep you in designer yoga pants," I muttered, loosening my tie. She whirled around, her blonde hair catching the kitchen light like spun gold. Beautiful, manipulative, expensive gold. "Don't you dare blame me for your failures, Alex. I didn't make you take a dead-end job investigating credit card fraud for peanuts." That was rich, coming from someone who hadn't worked a day since our wedding 2 years ago. She'd quit her receptionist job the moment we signed the marriage certificate, claiming she needed to focus on building our home life. Apparently, that involved spending 8 hours a day at various spas and boutiques, while I worked overtime to cover her shopping addiction. "Dead-end job," I repeated, tasting the bitterness in those words. If she only knew the truth about my actual salary, she'd probably faint. But that was information I'd kept locked away since our first date, when I'd learned the hard way that women like Vanessa could smell money from 3 states away. "Yes, dead end," she continued, warming to her favorite topic, my apparent inadequacy as a provider. "Do you know what Sarah's husband bought her last week? A BMW. A BMW, Alex. And here you are, bringing home gas station burritos like some kind of what?" I asked quietly. She paused, her cruel smile faltering slightly. Even Vanessa had limits to how directly nasty she'd be. "Never mind, just try harder tomorrow, okay? I have lunch with the girls, and I can't keep making excuses for why we never go anywhere nice." The next day, she called me crying and begged me to come home immediately. But by then, I'd already started putting my plan into motion. What Vanessa didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask about in detail, was that I wasn't just any credit card fraud investigator. I was senior investigator Alex Landry, with security clearance that let me trace financial patterns that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. My real salary was $140,000 a year, plus bonuses that pushed it closer to $160,000. The $45,000 figure I'd given her during our courtship wasn't technically a lie. It was what I'd made at my previous job, 5 years and 3 promotions ago. I'd learned to hide my income after a string of relationships that ended the moment women discovered my bank balance. They'd suddenly become very interested in expensive restaurants, weekend trips, and moving in together. Vanessa had seemed different at first. She'd actually insisted on splitting dinner bills during our early dates. I'd thought I'd found someone who valued me for who I was, not what I earned. How spectacularly wrong I'd been. Sitting in my office the morning after the burrito incident, I pulled up our joint credit card statements on my monitor. As a fraud investigator, I had legitimate access to detailed transaction records. It was literally my job to spot suspicious spending patterns. What I found made my coffee taste like ash. $8,247 in the past month alone. Luxury spa treatments, designer clothing, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never seen. And then there were the charges that made my blood run cold. The Meridian Hotel, downtown. Every Thursday afternoon for the past 6 months. Always the same room number. Always charged to our joint account while I ate leftover takeout at my desk. My colleague Jennifer walked by my cubicle, noticed my expression, and paused. "You look like someone who just discovered embezzlement." Please tell me it's not our case. Personal matter, I said, minimizing the screen. Hey, hypothetically, if someone was using a joint credit card for unauthorized activities, what would you recommend? Jennifer raised an eyebrow. She was sharp, had been doing this job longer than me, and could read people like financial statements. Hypothetically, document everything. Screenshot transactions, print statements, save receipts, and maybe consider whether you want to be joint on that account much longer. That afternoon, I drove to the Meridian Hotel during my lunch break. It was the kind of place that charged $30 for a cocktail and had valet parking. I sat in the lobby, pretending to work on my laptop, and waited. At 2:47 p.m., Vanessa walked through the revolving doors. She looked stunning. Designer dress I'd never seen before, hair professionally styled, carrying a purse that probably cost more than my car payment. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in places like this, someone whose husband could afford to keep her in the lifestyle she deserved. 5 minutes later, a man joined her at the elevator bank. Tall, muscled, probably mid-20s. The kind of guy who spent more time at the gym than I spent awake. He put his hand on the small of her back as they stepped into the elevator together, and she leaned into him like she'd never leaned into me. I sat there for another hour, numbly typing nonsense into a blank document, watching other people live their expensive lives in the marble and gold lobby. When I finally left, I had a plan forming in my mind. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was just accounting, making sure all the bills got paid by the right people. That evening, Vanessa was already home when I arrived, fresh from her yoga class, and complaining about the traffic downtown. How was yoga? I asked, hanging up my jacket. Oh, challenging. We worked on some really difficult positions today. She didn't even blush when she said it. I nodded and headed to the kitchen, where I opened a can of soup for dinner. When she wrinkled her nose at the smell, I just shrugged. Emergency funds getting low, I said. We might need to tighten the belt for a while. For the first time in months, I saw genuine concern flash across her face. Over the next 3 weeks, I documented everything with the methodical precision that had made me good at my job. Vanessa's spending patterns, her lies about where she'd been, the growing list of bills she'd forgotten to pay. The rent, the utilities, the insurance. All of it falling on me while she spent more in a week than most families spent in a month. I also started making some financial adjustments of my own. The first thing I did was separate our finances in ways she'd never notice. My direct deposit had always gone into my personal account. Vanessa had access to it, but she'd never paid attention to the actual amounts. She just knew that money appeared regularly and that I'd transfer funds to our joint account for household expenses. What she didn't know was that I'd been transferring far more than necessary, building up a cushion for her spending habits. I stopped doing that. Instead, I opened a new savings account at a different bank and started routing my real salary there. The joint account would only get enough to cover actual necessities, groceries, utilities, basic expenses. No more buffer for spa days and designer shopping sprees. The second thing I did was start tracking her movements more carefully. Not stalking. I wasn't some creepy private investigator hiding in bushes. But I was a fraud investigator, and I knew how to spot patterns in data. Credit card timestamps, GPS data from our shared phone plan, even social media posts that didn't match her claimed whereabouts. Vanessa was remarkably consistent in her dishonesty. Every Tuesday she had book club, but the charges showed up at expensive boutiques. Every Thursday was yoga class at the Meridian Hotel. Every Saturday was girls' brunch that lasted from noon until evening and involved charges at jewelry stores and luxury spas. The man from the hotel was Derek Shaw, according to his Instagram profile that Vanessa had liked dozens of posts from. Personal trainer, aspiring fitness influencer, and apparently her Tuesday and Thursday appointment. His bio included gems like living my best life and success is the best revenge, the kind of motivational nonsense that people with no actual accomplishments posted to feel important. But the most interesting discovery came when I cross-referenced our credit card statements with Derek's social media posts. The expensive dinners Vanessa claimed were work events for her non-existent job coincided perfectly with Derek's posts about amazing dates with my beautiful girl. The weekend shopping trips she said were with her sister happened to match Derek's stories about spoiling someone special. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was funding it with my money, then coming home to complain about my cheap dinner choices. On a rainy Thursday evening, 3 weeks after I'd started my investigation, the first bill came back declined. The electric company had tried to process their automatic payment from our joint account, but there wasn't enough money to cover it. Vanessa stormed into my home office, waving the past due notice like a battle flag. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why don't we have money for the electric bill?" I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing fraud cases, real ones for my actual job. "I guess we spent more than usual this month. Maybe we should look at cutting back on some expenses." Cutting back? Her voice hit that particular pitch that meant I was about to get a lecture about my failings as a provider. "Alex, we can't just not pay our bills. What are people going to think?" "I don't know," I said mildly. "What do you think they'll think?" She stared at me, probably trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic. I wasn't. I genuinely wanted to know what she thought people would think when they found out the truth about how she'd been spending our money. "I think," she said slowly, "that you need to figure out how to make more money, or at least manage the money we have better." I nodded thoughtfully. "You're probably right. Maybe we should sit down this weekend and go through all our expenses together. See where the money's actually going." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. That's not necessary. I'm sure it's just a temporary thing. Maybe you could just transfer some money from your emergency fund." "What emergency fund?" I asked, and that was when she started crying. "Please," Vanessa sobbed into her phone the next morning. "I need you." I was sitting in my new corporate apartment, a furnished place I'd rented the week before, using my real income to secure a lease she knew nothing about. The phone was on speaker while I ate actual breakfast food from actual plates, not gas station pastries, eaten standing over the kitchen sink. "Need me for what?" I asked, scratching Bailey behind the ears. The dog had adapted to our new living situation, with the resilience that only rescue animals possess. He seemed happier here, actually. Less tension in the air. "The eviction notice," she said, her voice breaking. "They want us out in 30 days, and the power company is threatening to shut off the electricity." "Alex, I don't understand what happened. Where did all the money go?" I could have explained exactly where the money had gone. I had spreadsheets, transaction records, and a timeline that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Instead, I said, "That sounds really stressful. What's your plan?" "My plan?" She sounded genuinely confused by the concept. "My plan is for you to fix this. Transfer money from your savings or get a loan or something. That's what husbands do." "I see. And what do wives do?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, she said, "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one. I'm trying to understand our marriage better. I work 60 hours a week, I pay all the bills, I come home to gas station food because we can't afford anything else. You spend your days doing what exactly?" "I manage our household," she said, but the conviction was gone from her voice. "I take care of things." "What things?" Another long pause. "Alex, this isn't the time for philosophical discussions about marriage roles. We're about to be homeless." "You're about to be homeless," I corrected gently. "I'll be fine." That was when she realized I wasn't calling from our apartment. The divorce papers were served 3 days later, while she was at Derek's gym trying to convince him to let her move in with him. I knew this because Derek had posted an Instagram story about Crazy women who think one hookup means they can move in. Apparently, even personal trainers had standards about gold diggers. I wasn't trying to be cruel with the timing. It was just efficient. Vanessa had spent our entire marriage treating me like a financial resource rather than a person. So I decided to treat our divorce like a business transaction. Clean, documented, and final. The asset disclosure was my favorite part of the legal process. Watching Vanessa's face when she learned about my real salary, my separate accounts, and the $280,000 in savings and investments she'd never known existed was almost worth the 2 years of gas station dinners. "You've been lying to me," she said across the conference table, her lawyer looking uncomfortable beside her. "I've been protecting myself," I replied. Turns out that was a good decision. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in high-asset divorces, had clearly done her homework. "Mr. Landry, my client was under the impression that your household income was significantly lower than these documents indicate." "Your client never asked to see my tax returns," I said. "She also never asked why I could afford the rent on our apartment."
Intimate text intro, another weather yummy.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
Or the lease on her car, or the credit limit on our joint account. She just assumed I was going into debt to maintain her lifestyle. "Were you going into debt?" Patricia asked. "No, I was subsidizing her spending for my separate accounts that predate our marriage and remain my separate property under state law." Vanessa was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "You let me think we were poor." "You never asked if we were poor. You just complained that I was cheap." I slid a folder across the table. "These are printouts of your spending over the past 2 years. $8,000 to $12,000 per month, not including rent and utilities. For comparison, the median household income in our city is $54,000 per year." Patricia opened the folder, and I watched her eyebrows climb toward her hairline as she flipped through the pages. Hotel charges, spa treatments, designer clothing, expensive restaurants. All of it documented with timestamps and merchant names. "Some of these charges are at the Meridian Hotel," Patricia said carefully. "Can you explain those?" Vanessa's face went white. I sometimes met friends there for drinks." 47 times in 6 months?" I asked. "Always the same room number? Always on Thursdays? Always for 3 to 4 hours?" The room went very quiet. Patricia closed the folder and looked at her client. "Mrs. Landry, I think we need to discuss realistic expectations for this divorce settlement." 2 hours later, we were done. No spousal support. Adultery and financial irresponsibility had eliminated that possibility. No claim on my separate assets. They were protected by the prenup she'd signed without reading. No claim on my pension or retirement accounts. Those were also separate property. Vanessa would get half of our joint assets, which amounted to about $3,000 in checking, and the furniture in our apartment. She would also be responsible for paying back the $40,000 in marital funds she'd spent on her affair, though we all knew she'd never be able to do that. As we left the law office, she grabbed my arm in the parking lot. "Alex, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then back at her face. She was still beautiful, still the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. But I could see the desperation now, the calculation behind her tears. "Fix what?" I asked. "Our marriage. I'll change. I'll get a job. I'll be the wife you deserve." The wife I deserve wouldn't have spent 2 years stealing from me to fund her affair. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "It wasn't stealing. We're married. It was our money." "No," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "It was my money. You just spent it." That was the last time we spoke as husband and wife. The final divorce decree came through on a Tuesday. I celebrated by taking Bailey to the dog park and buying myself a real dinner at a restaurant that didn't sell lottery tickets. Vanessa celebrated by moving into her mother's basement and starting a GoFundMe to help with her unexpected financial hardship. I didn't donate. Derek had ghosted her completely once he realized she wouldn't be funding their relationship anymore. His Instagram showed him with a new, beautiful girl. This one apparently had her own money, based on the designer handbags and luxury car in his posts. Vanessa had been replaced faster than a gym membership. Her friends from the spa and boutique circuit had also vanished with remarkable speed. Turns out, friendships based on expensive lunches and shopping trips don't survive when one person can no longer afford expensive lunches and shopping trips. The group chat she'd constantly been texting during our marriage had gone silent, and her social media posts about finding out who your real friends are got fewer and fewer likes each week. I felt bad about that for almost 30 seconds. My own life had improved dramatically. The corporate apartment had become permanent. I'd bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood where Bailey could have a yard and I could eat whatever I wanted without judgment. My work performance had actually gotten better once I wasn't constantly stressed about money and lies. I'd even gotten a promotion with a raise that brought my salary up to $165,000. Vanessa had tried calling a few times in the weeks after the divorce was finalized. I'd let them all go to voicemail, and eventually she'd stop trying. The messages had followed a predictable pattern: anger, bargaining, self-pity, and finally, resignation. The last one had simply said, "I hope you're happy." I was. Not because she was suffering. I wasn't cruel enough to take pleasure in someone else's downfall, even someone who'd treated me as badly as she had. I was happy because I was finally living honestly. No more lies about money, no more pretending to be poorer than I was, no more walking on eggshells around someone who saw me as a paycheck rather than a person. I could eat gas station burritos if I wanted to, and sometimes I did, just because I liked them. I could also eat at nice restaurants or cook elaborate meals at home or order expensive takeout at midnight if the mood struck me. The choice was mine, and that freedom was worth more than any marriage that had been built on deception from both sides. Bailey seemed to approve of our new life. He'd gained weight, his coat was shinier, and he'd stopped hiding in corners when voices were raised. Dogs are good judges of character and better judges of happiness. If Bailey was content, I was probably doing something right. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Patricia Chen at a coffee shop downtown. She was surprised to see me looking so relaxed. "You know," she said, stirring sugar into her latte, "in 20 years of divorce law, I've never seen someone handle a case quite like you did. Most people get emotional, try to punish their ex-spouse, make demands that aren't realistic. You just documented everything and walked away." "I'm not most people," I said. "Clearly. Your ex-wife, on the other hand." She shook her head. "I've had 3 calls from her in the past month, asking if there's any way to reopen the settlement. Apparently, reality has been educational." I wasn't surprised. Vanessa had never lived in the real world, where actions had consequences and money didn't magically appear to solve problems. Learning to budget on a receptionist's salary while living in her childhood bedroom was probably the first genuine challenge she'd faced since college. "Any chance she'll succeed?" I asked. Patricia laughed. "Not unless she can prove fraud or duress, and good luck with that. Your documentation was flawless, and her spending patterns speak for themselves. She made her choices, and now she gets to live with them." That seemed fair to me. As I drove home that evening, Bailey riding shotgun with his head out the window, I thought about the gas station burrito that had started this whole process. Such a small thing, a cheap dinner after a long day of work. But it had been the moment I'd realized how fundamentally broken my marriage was. Vanessa had thrown that burrito in the trash like it was garbage, but it hadn't been garbage to me. It had been dinner, chosen and paid for by someone who worked hard for his money. It had represented my effort, my time, my attempt to feed us both when she'd forgotten to handle the grocery shopping again. She'd thrown it away like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. But I'd learned something important that night. I wasn't garbage, and I didn't have to let anyone treat me like I was. I had value that went beyond my bank account, and I deserved better than someone who only saw me as a source of funding for her lifestyle. The divorce hadn't been revenge, it had been accounting, making sure everyone paid their fair share and that the bills finally went to the right person. For the first time in years, I'd paid the bill that mattered most, the cost of my own self-respect. And it was worth every cent. 1 year later, I was living the life I should have been living all along. The house was perfect. 3 bedrooms, a fenced yard for Bailey, and a kitchen where I could cook actual meals without anyone complaining about the smell or the cost. I'd furnished it slowly, choosing pieces I actually liked rather than whatever was cheapest or whatever someone else demanded. It felt like home in a way that the expensive apartment never had. Work was going well. The promotion had led to another promotion, and I was now managing a team of fraud investigators. My experience with financial deception had, ironically, made me better at spotting it in other people's cases. I'd developed training programs on identifying patterns of financial abuse that were being used by law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Bailey had settled into suburban life with enthusiasm. He'd made friends with the neighbor's golden retriever, discovered the joy of chasing squirrels, and appointed himself the unofficial greeter for every delivery driver who came to our door. He was living his best life, and watching him be happy made me happy too. I'd even started dating again, carefully, honestly, and with full financial disclosure from the beginning. It was amazing how much easier relationships were when you didn't have to lie about who you were or what you could afford. I'd met Sarah at a coffee shop where she was grading papers. She was a high school teacher, practical and funny, with her own house and her own retirement plan. We'd been seeing each other for 3 months, and she'd never once asked me to pay for anything I couldn't comfortably afford. She also loved Bailey, which was non-negotiable. As for Vanessa, I heard occasional updates through the small social network of our former shared acquaintances. She'd gotten a job at a dental office, moved into a studio apartment, and traded her BMW for a used Honda. Derek had moved to California to pursue his influencer dreams, and her spa friends had moved on to other people with more disposable income. It sounded like a normal life, actually. The kind of life most people lived, where you worked for money and spent within your means and didn't expect other people to fund your fantasies. Maybe it would be good for her in the long run. Maybe she'd learn to value things that couldn't be bought. But that wasn't my problem anymore. On a Saturday morning in late spring, I was in my backyard grilling burgers. Real ones from the butcher shop, because I could afford them and because I wanted them. Bailey was supervising from his favorite spot under the apple tree, and Sarah was helping me set up the picnic table for lunch. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. It was from across town where Vanessa's mother lived. I let it go to voicemail. "Aren't you going to check that?" Sarah asked, arranging the plates and napkins with the efficiency of someone who managed teenagers for a living. "Probably spam," I said, flipping the burgers. "If it's important, they'll leave a message." 20 minutes later, while we were eating lunch and Bailey was begging for scraps with his most pitiful expression, I finally listened to the voicemail. "Alex, it's me. I know I shouldn't be calling, but I wanted you to know that I'm doing okay. I have a job now in my own place, and I'm learning to live differently. I wanted to apologize for how things ended between us. You deserved better than what I gave you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. I hope you're happy. I really do." There was a long pause, then, "I threw away that burrito because I was angry at my own life, not at you. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I wanted you to know. Take care of yourself, Alex, and take care of Bailey." I deleted the message and put the phone back in my pocket. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked. "Everything's perfect," I said, and meant it. That afternoon, we took Bailey to the dog park and then went to a movie, a romantic comedy that Sarah picked and I paid for, without thinking about the cost. We held hands in the dark theater and shared overpriced popcorn, and I realized that this was what a normal relationship felt like. Easy, comfortable, honest. No games, no lies, no financial manipulation. Just 2 people who liked each other, building something real together. After the movie, we stopped at a gas station so I could fill up my tank. While Sarah used the restroom, I wandered inside and found myself in the food section, looking at the same brand of burritos that had started this whole journey. On impulse, I bought 2 of them. "Really?" Sarah said when she saw them. "Gas station burritos?" "They're actually pretty good," I said. "Want to try one?" She shrugged. "Sure. I've eaten worse things." We heated them up in my microwave when we got home and ate them on the couch, while Bailey watched hopefully for dropped cheese. Sarah made faces at the artificial flavoring and laughed at my defense of gas station cuisine, but she ate the whole thing. "Okay," she admitted. "They're not terrible. But next time, let's try that new Mexican place downtown." "Deal," I said. Later that evening, after Sarah had gone home and Bailey was asleep on his favorite rug, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and thought about the long, strange journey that had brought me here. A year and a half ago, I'd been eating gas station food because I was afraid to spend my own money. Tonight, I'd eaten gas station food because I wanted to, and because I could share the joke with someone who understood that it was a choice, not a necessity. The difference between those two moments was everything. I'd learned that you can't build a real relationship on lies, even well-intentioned ones. I'd learned that love without respect is just exploitation with better marketing. And I'd learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses, even if they hate you for it. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was worth more than I'd been settling for. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Thanks for a great day. See you tomorrow?" I typed back, "Absolutely. I'll cook this time. Real food, I promise." "Gas station burritos aren't real food," she replied, followed by a laughing emoji. "They're real food for people who appreciate the finer things in life," I wrote back. "You're weird. I like that about you." I smiled and put the phone down. Bailey opened one eye to check if anything interesting was happening, decided it wasn't, and went back to sleep. Outside, it started to rain. The gentle, steady rain that meant spring was finally settling in for good. I listened to it patting against the windows and thought about how much my life had changed since that night when Vanessa threw my dinner in the trash. She'd been right about one thing. I really had known how to make poverty taste worse. But what she'd never understood was that the poverty wasn't in the food. It was in accepting less than I deserved in every area of my life. Now I knew better. For the first time in years, I'd paid the bill that mattered most, the cost of my own happiness. And it turned out that price was exactly what I could afford.